As we proceed in this story, kindly like and subscribe. Obinna was restless that afternoon in school. His friends could see it in the way his eyes darted around, always looking for trouble. "Let's go into the Ijele Forest tonight," he said finally, leaning forward across the wooden desk. The others gasped. No one in the Muaka village talked about the forest without lowering their voice. It was a land of spirits, a place where hunters disappeared and farmers never returned. But Obinna only smirked. Those are just stories old people tell to keep us scared. Kelechi, eager to show he feared nothing, clapped his hands in excitement. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. Amara bit her lip. She remembered the warnings from her grandmother, who often spoke about the spirits that lived there. Ifani, quiet and thoughtful, said nothing at first, but his friends' mocking glances forced him to nod. By the end of the school day, the dare had spread like fire. Other students whispered behind their backs, waiting to see if they would truly go. For the four friends, pride had replaced common sense. None of them imagined the price they would pay. That evening, Amara sat on the clay veranda of her grandmother's hut. The old woman's wrinkled hands tapped her walking stick against the floor as she spoke. "The Ijele Forest is not a place for children," she warned. "Long ago, warriors sought its riches, but only their cries returned. Spirits walk freely there, and the land remembers every trespass." Amara shivered, but she dared not confess their plan. Her grandmother's sharp eyes seemed to see through her silence. "Amara," the old woman said, lowering her voice, "if you ever step there, do not touch what is sacred. The forest does not forgive." Later that night, when the group gathered by the roadside, Amara repeated the warning. Obinna only laughed. Old women love their tales. This is just a walk in the dark. Kelechi threw a stone into the bushes and grinned. "We will be back by morning, and everyone will talk about our courage." Ifani said nothing, but his unease grew heavier with each step toward the forest's edge. Deep inside, he wondered if Amara's grandmother had spoken the truth. The path to the Ijele Forest was narrow and overgrown, winding between tall elephant grasses. The four friends carried lanterns that flickered weakly against the pressing darkness. As they approached the rusted sign that marked the boundary, silence descended suddenly. The night insects that had filled the air with buzzing vanished. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sign read, "Keep out, land of the ancestors." Its letters were faded, but the message was clear. Obinna pushed the sign aside, his grin sharp with defiance. "Are we not men?" he asked boldly. "Come on." The others followed, though their steps grew slower. Beyond the sign, the air felt different, heavier, as if something unseen pressed against their chests. The moonlight that usually shone so brightly over Amuaka seemed dim, swallowed by the canopy of trees. Amara clutched her wrapper tightly around her shoulders, whispering a prayer under her breath. Ifani noticed the ground felt damp though no rain had fallen. Shadows stretched long and thin, curling unnaturally as the children walked deeper. Each step seemed to carry them farther from the world they knew. They wandered deeper into the forest, their lanterns lighting strange shapes among the trees. Soon, they stumbled upon a towering irako tree, its trunk wrapped in faded red and white cloth. Strange carvings, glowing faintly, marked its bark. Amara froze immediately. "This is a shrine," she whispered. "We should not be here." But Obinna, stubborn as always, scoffed. "It is only a tree dressed in rags." His hand reached out and touched the rough surface of the bark. The moment his skin brushed against it, a gust of cold wind swept through the clearing, rattling the leaves as though 1,000 unseen hands were clapping. The lantern flames bent sideways, nearly dying out. The carvings on the tree glowed brighter, like eyes opening after long sleep. Ifani grabbed Obinna's arm. "Leave it alone," he shouted. But Obinna only laughed nervously, trying to mask his fear. Kelechi stepped back, his grin fading for the first time that night. Amara covered her face, trembling. She could feel the forest shift around them, as though something ancient and angry had awakened. Their journey had crossed from adventure into danger. The clearing fell silent again, but not for long. A faint sound began to echo through the trees, soft, rhythmic beats, like drums played far away. The sound grew louder with every passing moment, until it seemed the forest itself pulsed with the rhythm. Obinna swallowed hard, his earlier bravado shrinking. Maybe it's just villagers playing drums," he muttered, though he knew no one dared come here. The ground beneath them vibrated slightly, as though hundreds of unseen dancers were stamping their feet in unison. Amara clung to Ifani's arm. "We must leave now," she cried. But every path they turned to seem swallowed in shadows, darker than before. The drumming quickened, rising into a frenzy. The trees swayed without wind, their branches twisting like arms. Kelechi shouted into darkness. "Who is there?" His voice trembled despite his attempt to sound bold. In response, the drumming stopped all at once, leaving behind a silence so sharp it hurt their ears. Then a low laugh rippled through the trees, cold and mocking. It was clear to them now. This was no music made by human hands. A soft hyena, laughter drifted from the branches above, bouncing from tree to tree until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. A figure stepped out from a tangle of vines, glowing faintly like moonlight on water. He wore a mask carved of polished wood, and from behind it, bright eyes studied them with amusement. Cowrie shells clinked at his ankles. "Children of dust," he said, speaking in a voice that sounded like many voices at once. "Why wake us from our sleep?" Obinna thrust out his chin. "We fear nothing," he said, forcing strength into his words. The trickster's smile widened beneath the mask. "Fear is clever. Your courage is not." He snapped his fingers, and the path behind him twisted shut, roots knitting together like a woven mat. Amara stepped forward. "Please," she said, "we mean no harm." The spirit tilted his head, considering her. "Meaning is small. Footsteps are loud." He lifted his staff, and the ground glowed with symbols they could not read. "The forest will judge. Walk where it sends you, and learn the price of pride." The earth quivered and opened at their feet. 4 narrow paths of pale light unfurled from the clearing, each marked by a different symbol. One showed a spear, another a mask, the third a calabash, and the fourth a mirror. The trickster tapped his staff. "Each of you must walk alone," he said. "The forest measures a heart when no friend is there to praise it." Obinna clenched his fists. He did not like the idea of being separated, but his pride forced him to agree. Kelechi tried to step onto Obinna's path, and the light burned his toes, pushing him back. "Your feet know where to go," the spirit chuckled. Amara's eyes filled with tears, yet she stood straighter. "We will meet again," she whispered to Afani. He nodded, calm even as fear knotted his stomach. They stepped onto their paths, one by one, and the forest swallowed each of them. The drumming returned, softer now, like a heartbeat far away. Overhead, the leaves closed like heavy curtains. Only the trickster remained in the clearing, humming to himself and waiting. Amara followed the path marked by a mirror until it led her into a grove of glassy trees. Every trunk reflected her face, but each reflection spoke a different fear. "You are weak," one sneered. "You are unseen," hissed another. "No one listens to you," whispered a third. She covered her ears, but the words slid through her fingers. The mirrors showed memories, moments when classmates spoke over her, when her good ideas were credited to louder voices. Her grandmother's warning echoed faintly. "Respect the spirits, but also respect yourself." Amara took a breath and lifted her chin. "I am here," she said, her voice steadying. The trees laughed. "Say it louder." She reached for a stone and threw it, shattering one mirror. "I am here," she said again, stronger. The grove rippled. She smashed another, then another. With each break, the insults faded, replaced by calm. At last she faced a final mirror that reflected her exactly as she was, afraid but standing. She touched it gently, and the glass softened into water. The path brightened. She stepped through, carrying a quiet courage. Obinna entered a vast clearing where warriors made of smoke lifted spears shaped from night. They formed a circle around him, their eyes hollow, their feet not touching the ground. "Bravery," they whispered, "is heavier than your tongue." Obinna raised his fists. He had won fights on the football field and in the street, but his punches passed through their bodies like mist. The warriors advanced, their spears pricking his pride, not his skin. "Who are you without applause?" one asked. Obinna's heart hammered. He lunged again and fell hard. Dust filled his mouth. He remembered the sign at the forest's edge, the elders' warnings, the laughter he used to hide his fear. He pushed himself to his knees. "I am sorry," he said, the words tasting bitter. "I am loud because I am afraid." The warriors paused. He lowered his head. "Teach me humility, and I will learn." The smoke thinned. The nearest warrior leaned close. placed a weightless hand on his shoulder, and nodded. The circle broke, and the spears sank into the earth like rain. The path opened, quiet and clear. Kelechi walked beneath hanging gourds that glowed like small moons. Golden coins lay scattered along the path, gleaming more brightly than daylight. He laughed and began to scoop them into his pockets. As he gathered more, the coins grew warmer and heavier until his clothes sagged. "Wealth suits you," a voice purred from the trees. He grinned, though sweat ran down his neck. Soon he could barely move. The path narrowed into thorns that caught on his trousers, and still he tried to carry the coins. "Drop them," the voice said, "or stay here counting forever." He hesitated. The gold felt like promise, status, power, praise. He imagined showing the village what he had found. But he also remembered his shadow peeling away, remembered the hyena laugh. Shame crawled across his skin. He emptied his pockets, one coin at a time, each drop ringing like a bell. The thorns loosened. Again, the voice urged when he tried to keep just one. He let that one fall, too. The gourds dimmed to a gentle light. He stood lighter, breathing freely. The path straightened and welcomed him forward. Ifani followed the quietest path, where fallen leaves softened every step. He was not strong or loud, but he listened well, and the forest seemed to recognize that. Ahead, he found a child tied gently to a tree with palm fibers, weeping softly. "Please help me," the child sobbed, eyes wide and shining. Ifani paused. He remembered Amara's grandmother's warning about tricks. Still, the tears soaked the child's cheeks. "If I free you," he said carefully, "will you harm me?" The child shook his head. "I am cold and afraid." Ifani studied the knots and loosened them slowly so he could retie them if needed. When the last strand fell, the child stepped forward and hugged him. The hug felt strangely warm, like sunlight. The child shape blurred, then expanded into a taller figure wrapped in white. A gentle spirit stood before him, smiling. "Compassion is a lantern," it said, touching his forehead. "Carry it." A soft mark of light remained on his skin. The forest around him brightened, and the path rolled open like a woven mat leading homeward. The four paths converged at a river that shone like liquid moonlight. Amara arrived first, her breath steady. Ifani stepped from the trees next, a soft glow at his brow. Obinna pushed through last, dusty but quieter, his eyes different. They looked for Kelechi with relief that quickly changed to worry. He appeared moments later, shoulders drooping, pockets empty. "I am here," he said, though his voice lacked its old laughter. The river hummed with a deep tone that vibrated in their bones. The trickster stood on the opposite bank, tapping his staff against the water. "The forest has weighed you," he announced. "Each of you learned something you should have learned in daylight. Yet balance demands a price." The river rose slightly, as if in agreement. Amara stepped forward. "We faced the trials," she said. "We changed." The spirit nodded slowly. "Change is a promise, not payment." Ifani's hand tightened around hers. Obinna's jaw clenched. Kelechi stared at the water and saw his reflection warp into a shadow. The trickster's mask tilted. The debt is not negotiable. A cold wind swept across the river, and the water stilled as smooth as polished stone. "One of you cannot leave," the trickster said, his voice suddenly without humor. The words fell like heavy stones in their chests. Obinna started protests, but nothing came out. Amara shook her head, tears prickling her eyes. "No," she whispered. "We came together. We leave together." The spirit's mask did not move. The forest remembers the first trespass and the last lie. It remembers pride and greed and silence when truth should be spoken. Ifani turned to Kelechi, remembering the shadow, the gold, the strained laughter. Kelechi's hands trembled. "Take me," he said at last, barely audible. "I mocked the warnings first. I want to be admired more than I wanted to be wise." The trickster considered him for a long moment. "Confession is a door," he said, "but doors do not always open outward." The river brightened, and its pale light reached toward Kelechi's feet like gentle ropes. He did not step back. He closed his eyes and waited. The light wrapped around Kelechi's ankles, warm and cool at once, and climbed his legs like climbing vines. He gasped but did not struggle. Obinna grabbed his arm, trying to pull him free, and his fingers slid through as if Kelechi were becoming water. "Forgive me," Kelechi said, looking at his friend with steady sadness. "Tell my mother I did not die foolish. Tell her I learned too late." Amara sobbed openly. Ifani whispered a blessing his grandmother had taught him. The trickster lifted his staff and drew a slow circle in the air. Kelechi's body turned to mist at the edges, then softened entirely, becoming a shimmering column that the river drank without a ripple. His laughter, so familiar, so bright, rose once and faded like a bird flying into the night. The light collapsed into itself and vanished. Only the faint echo of cowries clinking remained. The trickster lowered his staff. "The forest keeps what it is owed," he said softly. "Leave now. Carry your lessons like water. Spill none." The far bank eased inward, making a path of wet stones. They crossed the stones one by one. Careful not to slip, the trees parted ahead, thinner now, and the air grew warmer. Amara's tears dried into tight lines on her cheeks. Obinna moved like a man twice his age, shoulders bowed by a weight he could not set down. Ifani kept glancing back, as if a late choice could call Kelechi home. When they reached the edge of the forest, dawn stood waiting with a pale sky. A group of early farmers spotted them and hurried over, shocked by their torn clothes and haunted faces. "Where do you come from?" one asked, already knowing the answer. "The forest," Ifani said, voice rough. The farmers crossed themselves in the old way and led them to the village. Doors opened. Mothers cried out. Fathers frowned in anger and fear. Amara's grandmother stood at her threshold, eyes wet but unsurprised. "You have returned short by one," she said. No one argued. The sun climbed slowly and the day moved on, but for the three friends, time felt cracked, like a calabash glued badly back together. That night, the village held a small gathering by the central fire. Elders circled the flames, faces stern and tired. Amara's grandmother spoke for them all. "You walked where hunters walk with charms, and where even brave men whisper. The forest has taken its share." She placed a hand on Amara's head, and then on Ifani's. When she touched Obinna, he flinched. "Humility will be your medicine," she said to him. "Take it daily." She turned to crowd. "Let no child be mocked for fear again. Fear sometimes keeps the living alive." A sudden wind tugged at the fire, and in the flicker they all heard a faint laugh. Kelechi's laugh, twist through the flames and vanish. The elders nodded as if an old agreement had been renewed. "The boundary stands," an elder declared. "Anyone who enters now enters with the knowledge of the cost." The villagers drifted home quietly, but many looked toward the tree line as they walked, measuring the dark with uneasy eyes. The forest felt closer than it had the day before. Days returned their ordinary shapes. School bells, market noise, goats wandering where they should not. But the three friends moved within them like strangers. At night, Amara dreamed of mirrors that did not break. She woke and repeated her truth aloud until the fear loosened. Ifani began to help elders carry water and sweep the square before anyone else woke, as if service could steady the world. Obinna avoided jokes and loud rooms. He apologized to teachers he had mocked and to a boy he once pushed on the field. Sometimes the wind bent around corners and sounded exactly like Kelechi laughing, and all three would pause, listening. Letters they wrote to his mother stretched into long pages. They described the boy she raised, not the mistake he made. On the 40th day after the binding, they returned to the forest's edge with cola nuts and palm wine. They poured the wine into the earth. The ground drank without a sound. When they left, they felt lighter but not free. Grief, they learned, was a companion, not a visitor. The lesson did not arrive as a sudden understanding. It formed slowly, like a path cleared by many careful footsteps. Amara started a small group at school where younger students could talk without being mocked. She listened more and spoke with new confidence when it mattered. Ifani began to gather stories from elders and write them down, believing that memory was a kind of fence that could protect the living. Obinna trained with the football team quietly, lifting others instead of lifting himself. When someone dared a new student to touch the rusted sign at the forest border, Obinna stood between them and shook his head. Respect is also courage, he said simply. Word spread that the four had entered the forest, and 3 had returned, but the tale changed in the telling. Some claimed they saw a hyena-faced man at the market. Others swore a river sang during Harmattan. The truth remained to the friends. Bravery without wisdom is hunger without food. They carried that truth carefully, and it changed the way their feet touched the ground. Years later, the sign at the edge of Ijele leaned with age, its letters more ghost than paint. New children tested its rust with curious fingers, but most pulled back when their parents called. The trees had grown taller, their crowns knitted tight, holding the moon like a secret. Traders still cut across the old road at noon, never at night. Sometimes, when the wind leaned out of the forest, people heard distant drums that might have been thunder. Amara walked past with her own students and told them to trust their fear when it spoke softly. Ifani, now a patient teacher of stories, reminded them that the land remembers footsteps. Obinna paused longest, looking into the cool shade, the weight of his promise steady on his shoulders. In the hush that followed, a laugh rolled through the leaves, light, playful, familiar, and then faded. The forest did not threaten. It simply waited, as it always had, for those who wanted glory more than wisdom. And in that waiting, the town learned to live with respect, with memory, and with a measured courage that kept them whole.